The stagecoach driver found her half frozen in the mountain pass, clutching a carpetbag with nothing but her dead husband's watch inside, her lips blue as a winter sky, and her eyes empty as abandoned wells. Lily Lancaster had buried 3 people in 2 months, her husband to fever, her infant daughter to the same cruel sickness, and her mother-in-law to heartbreak. And now the December winds of 1881 howled through the San Bernardino mountains like wolves hungry for one more soul. The driver wrapped her in blankets that smelled of horse and tobacco, asked her twice where she was headed, and when she could not answer through the chattering of her teeth, he made the decision for her, bringing her down from the pass into San Bernardino, California, a town clinging to the edge of civilization where the desert met the mountains and desperate people came to reinvent themselves or disappear entirely. She stumbled off that stagecoach into the bitter cold of a California winter that people back east would not believe existed, her black morning dress hanging loose on a frame that had forgotten how to eat, her auburn hair tangled and dull beneath a bonnet she had not removed in days. The driver pressed 2 silver dollars into her palm, coins she had not earned and did not deserve, and pointed her toward a boarding house at the end of the dusty street. She walked because walking was all she knew how to do anymore, one foot and then the other, past the saloon where rough laughter spilled into the gray afternoon, past the general store with its windows fogged from the warmth inside, past the livery stable where horses stamped and snorted in their stalls. The cold bit through her thin cloak, but she barely felt it. She had grown numb to everything except the terrible weight of loss that pressed down on her shoulders like stones. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman whose husband had died building the railroad 20 years prior, and who asked no questions when Lily counted out the last of her coins for a week's rent on a room barely larger than a closet. The room had a narrow bed, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a window that looked out on an alley where nothing grew. Lily set down her carpetbag, sat on the edge of the bed, and discovered that she could not cry anymore. She had cried so much in the past weeks that her body had no tears left to give. She sat in the gathering darkness and stared at the wall and wondered why she was still breathing when everyone she loved had stopped. The days blurred together in shades of gray. She found work washing dishes at a restaurant that served miners and ranch hands, work that left her hands raw and aching, but occupied her mind just enough to keep the worst thoughts at bay. The restaurant owner was a gruff man named Samuel, who paid her barely enough to cover her room and 1 meal a day, but he did not ask about her past, and he did not expect conversation, which was all Lily could manage. She washed plates and cups and silverware until her fingers wrinkled and her back screamed. And then she walked back to the boarding house through streets growing colder as December deepened, climbed the stairs to her tiny room, and lay awake listening to the wind rattle the window frame. It was Mrs. Chen who told her about the ranch. The widow had come upstairs one evening to find Lily sitting in the dark, not even bothering to light the lamp, and had sat down beside her with a heaviness that spoke of shared sorrow. Mrs. Chen did not offer empty words of comfort. Instead, she spoke of a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, a place where a man named Preston Everett raised cattle and horses, and sometimes hired people willing to work hard for fair wages. Mrs. Chen said he was a decent man, which in a place like San Bernardino meant something, and that he had recently lost his cook to marriage and was looking for someone to replace her. Lily wanted to say she knew nothing about cooking for ranch hands, that she could barely muster the energy to feed herself, but Mrs. Chen was already standing, smoothing her dark skirts, saying she would send word to Preston Everett that someone might be coming. The next morning, Lily woke to find a hand-drawn map slipped under her door, showing the road out of town and the turn off to the Everett ranch. She held that scrap of paper in her raw hands and felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps the memory of what hope had once felt like. She gave notice at the restaurant, received her final wages in coins that clinked hollow in her palm, and packed her carpet bag with the few belongings she owned. Mrs. Chen pressed a bundle of food into her hands when she left, rice cakes wrapped in cloth that still held warmth, and told her in careful English that sometimes the only way forward was to keep walking even when you could not see the path. Lily thanked her, her voice rusty from disuse, and set out on the road heading east from town. The December morning was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that made every breath visible and turned the ground hard as iron. Lily walked along a rutted road that cut through scrubland dotted with Joshua trees and sagebrush, mountains rising blue and distant to the north. Her shoes were worn thin, and every stone pressed through the soles, but she kept walking, the carpet bag growing heavier with each mile. A wagon passed her going the opposite direction, the driver tipping his hat but not stopping, and then she was alone again with only the crunch of her footsteps and the whisper of wind through dry grass. She almost missed the turnoff, a narrow track marked by a weathered sign that read Everett Ranch in faded letters. The track wound through rolling hills covered in winter brown grass, and in the distance she could see buildings clustered together, wood and stone structures that looked solid and permanent in a way that made her throat tighten. She had not had a permanent place in so long. Her husband had been a traveling preacher, moving from town to town in Kansas and Missouri, living in borrowed rooms and making do, and their daughter had been born in a stranger's house during a spring storm. Lily pushed the memories down and kept walking. The ranch yard was busy with activity despite the cold. Men were working with horses in a large corral, their shouts carrying across the open space, and smoke rose from the chimney of what looked like a bunkhouse. Lily stood at the edge of the yard, suddenly uncertain, her courage faltering. She did not belong here among these capable, purposeful people. She should turn around and walk back to town, find some other way to survive that did not require her to pretend she was anything other than broken. You lost. The voice came from behind her, deep and measured, and she spun around, nearly dropping her carpetbag. The man standing there was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a heavy coat, a battered hat shadowing a face weathered by sun and wind. He had dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw dark with stubble, and eyes the color of creek water, gray-green and startlingly direct. He was looking at her with curiosity but not unkindness, his gloved hands resting on his belt. "This is private property, but if you need directions back to town, I can help." "I am looking for Preston Everett," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Mrs. Chen sent word about the cooking position." Something shifted in the man's expression, surprise followed by what might have been relief. "I'm Preston Everett," he said, and stepped closer, studying her with those direct eyes. "Mrs. Chen said someone might come, but I was not expecting." He trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. "You look half frozen. Come inside and we will talk." He did not wait for her to agree, just turned and walked toward the largest of the buildings, a two-story house built of wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Lily followed because she did not know what else to do, her legs trembling with exhaustion and cold. Preston Everett held the door open for her, and she stepped into warmth that made her skin prickle and sting. The house was plainly furnished but clean, with a large stone fireplace crackling with heat and windows that let in the thin winter light. He gestured for her to sit in a chair near the fire and disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen. She sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap, her carpetbag at her feet. The warmth was almost painful after the hours of cold, and she could feel her fingers and toes beginning to throb as blood returned to them. She looked around the room, taking in the details. There were no decorative touches, no curtains or rugs or pictures on the walls, just the bare necessities of furniture and function. It was the home of a man who spent his time working, not living. Preston Everett returned with 2 cups of coffee, strong and black, and handed her one before settling into a chair across from her. Up close and in better light, she could see he was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, his face showing the kind of weariness that came from responsibility rather than years. He sipped his coffee and waited, not rushing her, and she realized he was giving her time to gather herself. "My name is Lily Lancaster," she said finally. "I have been working at the restaurant in town, washing dishes. Mrs. Chen thought I might be suited for cooking here, though I should tell you honestly that I have never cooked for a large number of people. I do not want to mislead you about my experience." Preston nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "How many men do you think work this ranch?" "I do not know," Lily admitted. 8 counting me, sometimes more during roundup or branding, but right now 8. The previous cook made breakfast and dinner for everyone, packed lunches for the men riding out. It is hard work and the hours are long, but I pay $20 a month plus room and board. The room is upstairs, small but private, and you would take your meals with the hands. Does that sound like something you could manage? $20 a month was more than she had been making at the restaurant, and room and board meant she would not have to worry about rent or where her next meal was coming from. It sounded like salvation, and that terrified her because she had learned that hope was dangerous. "Why would you hire me when I just told you I lack experience?" Preston set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Mrs. Chen does not recommend people lightly. If she thought you could do this, then I trust her judgment. And honestly, Mrs. Lancaster, you look like someone who needs a place to land for a while. I've been there. I know what it looks like." The unexpected kindness in his words nearly undid her. She felt her eyes prick with heat, but no tears came because she had none left. She swallowed hard and nodded. "When would you want me to start?" "Today, if you are able. I will show you the kitchen and the supplies, introduce you to the men at dinner tonight. Tomorrow morning you will be on your own, but I think you will manage. You have that look about you." "What look is that? Like you are stronger than you believe you are." He stood and picked up his hat from where he had set it on a side table. "Come on. I will show you your room first so you can settle in. Then we will go over everything you need to know." Lily followed him up a narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, where a hallway led to several closed doors. He opened one to reveal a small room with a single bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard toward the mountains. It was simple and plain and more than she had dared hope for. She set her carpetbag on the bed and turned to find Preston watching her from the doorway. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with everything she had left. "Do not thank me yet. Wait until you have survived your first week of feeding 8 hungry cowboys." He grinned, and it transformed his serious face into something younger and more open. "Take a few minutes to rest, then come downstairs and we will get started." He left her alone, and Lily sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. She had a job. She had a room. She had a chance to survive the winter. It was more than she had possessed when she woke up that morning, and yet she felt no relief, only a vast emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. She pressed her hands against her face and counted her breaths the way she had learned to do in the worst moments, counting and breathing until the tightness in her chest loosened enough to let her stand. The kitchen was larger than she expected, with a big iron stove, a long wooden table for food preparation, shelves stocked with supplies, and a pantry filled with sacks of flour and beans and potatoes. Preston walked her through everything, showing her where the dishes were kept, how the stove worked, where the root cellar was located for cold storage. He explained that the men expected breakfast at 5 in the morning, dinner at 6 in the evening, and that she should prepare something they could take with them for midday, usually bread and cheese and dried meat. It sounded overwhelming, but Lily nodded and tried to remember everything he was telling her. "The men are good workers and they will appreciate decent food," Preston said as he closed the pantry door. "They will also forgive imperfection because the last cook set the bar fairly low. Do your best, and that will be enough." Lily wanted to ask about the last cook, about why she had left, about what Preston Everett's story was, and why he was being so kind to a stranger who showed up on his doorstep with nothing. But she kept her questions to herself because she did not want to invite questions in return. She was not ready to talk about Kansas or fever or tiny graves dug in frozen ground. That evening she made her first meal, a simple stew with beef and vegetables, biscuits that came out slightly lopsided but edible, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The men filed into the dining room attached to the kitchen, tracking in cold and the smell of horses, and took their seats at a long table that could accommodate a dozen. They were a mixed group, young and old, weathered and scarred, and they looked at her with curiosity that made her want to disappear into the walls. Preston introduced her simply as Lily, the new cook, and the men nodded and murmured greetings before turning their attention to the food. Lily served the stew and biscuits and then retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding. She could hear them eating, the scrape of spoons against bowls, the low rumble of conversation, and then one voice rose above the others. "This is actually edible. Hell, it is better than edible." "Where did you find her boss?" "San Bernardino," Preston replied, his voice carrying clearly. "And if you want her to keep cooking, you will all remember your manners and treat her with respect. Anyone who does not will answer to me. Understood?" A chorus of affirmatives followed, and Lily felt something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. She cleaned up the kitchen while the men finished eating, scrubbing pots and pans with fierce concentration, and when they filed out, several of them stopped to thank her, their voices gruff but sincere. Preston was the last to leave, pausing in the doorway. "You did well," he said quietly. "Get some rest. Morning comes early." Lily climbed the stairs to her small room as the house settled into nighttime quiet. She could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the window, and in the distance, the lowing of cattle. She lay down on the bed without bothering to undress, too exhausted to do more than pull a quilt over herself. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless, and for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night without waking. The days fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn to start the fire in the stove, put on coffee, and began preparing breakfast. The men ate quickly and headed out to their work, and then the house was quiet for a while, giving her time to clean up and start preparations for dinner. She baked bread, peeled potatoes, learned to make the kind of hearty, filling food that kept working men going through long days in the cold. It was exhausting work, but it occupied her hands and her mind, and that was what she needed. Preston was a constant presence, though never intrusive. He checked in with her each morning to see if she needed anything from town, complimented her cooking in his understated way, and sometimes sat at the kitchen table with his own coffee while she worked, reading through ledgers or correspondence. He did not try to make conversation, seemed to understand that she was not ready for that, and his quiet companionship became something she looked forward to without quite realizing it. A week passed, and then two. December deepened into true winter, with frost coating the windows each morning and the mountain peaks white with snow. Lily found herself watching Preston when he was not looking, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence, the way he spoke to his men with respect, the way his face softened when he looked at the horses in the corral. He was younger than her late husband had been, probably close to her own age of 24, and there was a solidness to him that made her feel anchored in a way she had not felt in months. It was dangerous, she told herself. She could not afford to feel anything for anyone. She was broken, hollowed out, a shell of a person going through motions. But the heart did not listen to logic, and slowly, quietly, something began to shift inside her. One evening in mid-December, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing wind that howled like a living thing and temperatures that plunged below freezing. The men came in from their work covered in ice, their faces red and raw, and Lily had hot stew and fresh bread waiting. They ate gratefully and retreated to the bunkhouse to huddle around their own stove, leaving her to clean up. Preston stayed behind, as he sometimes did, and helped her wash dishes despite her protests. "You do not have to do this," Lily said, her hands in soapy water. "You pay me to do the work." "I also live here," Preston replied, drying a plate with practiced efficiency. "And I was raised to help when help is needed. My mother would tan my hide if she saw me sitting idle while someone else worked." It was the first personal detail he had shared, and Lily found herself curious. "Is your mother still living?" "No. She died when I was 17, influenza. My father followed a year later, grief more than anything else. That is when I left Missouri and came west." He set down the dried plate and picked up another. "What about you? Do you have family?" Lily's hands stilled in the water. She had known this question would come eventually, but she was not prepared for the way it cut through her. "No, no family." Preston was quiet for a moment, and when she glanced at him, he was watching her with those perceptive gray-green eyes. "I am sorry." "That is a lonely thing." "Yes," she whispered and could say nothing more. Her throat had closed around words too painful to speak. He did not push, just returned to drying dishes, and they finished the work in silence. But when they were done, he did not leave immediately. Instead, he stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the storm. "It is going to be a hard night. If you need anything, if you get too cold up there, you can knock on my door. My room is the first one at the top of the stairs." "I will be fine," Lily said automatically. "I know you will be." "But the offer stands anyway." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Concern, yes, but something more, something that scared her because it felt like the beginning of connection and she could not survive another loss. "Good night, Lily." "Good night." He left, and she stood alone in the warm kitchen listening to the storm rage outside. That night she did not sleep well. The wind screamed and the window rattled, and she lay awake thinking about Preston Everett's kindness, about the way he looked at her, about the traitorous flutter of feeling in her chest that she thought had died with her daughter. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping everyone inside except for essential work with the animals. Lily cooked, and the men ate, and the hours stretched long. On the 3rd day, when the wind finally died down and the sun emerged weak and pale, Preston asked her if she wanted to walk outside for some fresh air. She agreed, surprising herself, and bundled into her thin cloak that was wholly inadequate for the cold. Preston frowned when he saw it. "Wait here." He disappeared and returned with a heavy sheepskin coat that dwarfed her frame. "This was my mother's. I have been keeping it in storage, but you should have it. You cannot survive a California winter in that thing you are wearing." Lily started to protest, but he was already helping her into the coat, his hands gentle as he settled it over her shoulders. It was warm and smelled faintly of cedar, and it fit well enough with the sleeves rolled up. She felt tears prick her eyes again, that phantom sensation of crying without moisture, and blinked them away. They walked together through the ranch yard, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The world was transformed by ice, every surface glittering in the sunlight, the mountains stark and beautiful against a blue sky. Preston pointed out different areas of the ranch, explaining his plans for expansion, his hopes for breeding better horses, his dreams for making this place something that would last. He spoke with passion and vision, and Lily found herself listening not just to his words but to the tone of his voice, the cadence of his speech, the way he gestured with his hands when he got excited about a particular idea. "You are different than I expected," she said without thinking, and then flushed when he looked at her with raised eyebrows. "I mean, most ranchers I have met are harder, more rough." Preston laughed, a sound she had not heard from him before, rich and genuine. "I can be hard when I need to be. But I find that treating people with decency works better in the long run than ruling with a fist. Besides, life is difficult enough without adding cruelty to it." They stopped at the corral where several horses stood watching them with alert eyes. Preston climbed onto the fence rail and held out his hand to one, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. The horse approached cautiously and lipped at his palm. "This is Honey. I raised her from a foal. She is smart and fast and stubborn as hell, which means we get along well." Lily smiled, a small, real smile that felt foreign on her face. "You love them, the horses." "I do. They are honest creatures. They do not lie or cheat or betray. If you treat them well, they will give you everything they have." He looked at her, his expression serious again. People could learn from that. She knew he was talking about more than horses, and she looked away, overwhelmed. She was not ready for this, for whatever was building between them, but she also could not seem to stop it. Preston jumped down from the fence, and they walked back to the house in silence that felt charged with unspoken things. Christmas arrived with little fanfare. Lily made a special dinner, roasting a small pig that one of the ranch hands had traded for in town, baking pies with dried apples, preparing vegetables with butter and herbs. The men were jubilant, celebrating with laughter and stories, and Preston produced a bottle of whiskey that was passed around. Lily served the meal and tried to retreat to the kitchen, but Preston called her back. "You are eating with us tonight," he said firmly. "It is Christmas, and no one should be alone on Christmas." She wanted to argue that she preferred being alone, that sitting at a table surrounded by people would only remind her of the Christmas before when her daughter was still alive, but the expectant faces of the men stopped her. She sat down at the far end of the table, and someone passed her a plate piled high with food. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, but she stayed until the meal was finished and the men began to drift away, full and content. Preston stayed to help her clean up again, a habit now, and when the work was done, he pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. He set it on the table in front of her. "I know you did not expect anything, but I wanted you to have this. Merry Christmas, Lily." She stared at the package, her hands trembling. "I did not get you anything. I do not need anything. Open it." She untied the string with clumsy fingers and folded back the paper to reveal a pair of leather gloves, beautifully made, lined with soft wool. They were practical and thoughtful, and she could not speak around the lump in her throat. No one had given her a gift since before. Since her old life. I noticed your hands were getting chapped from the work, Preston said quietly. These should help. Thank you, she managed, her voice breaking. This is too much. It is not nearly enough. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, warm and solid. Lily, I know you are hurting. I do not know the details and I will not ask unless you want to tell me, but I see it in your eyes every day. You carry grief like a weight on your shoulders. I just want you to know that you are not alone here. You have me now, and I am not going anywhere. His words struck something deep inside her, cracking the ice that had encased her heart. She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You do not understand. You cannot understand what I have lost. Then tell me. He stood too, his eyes searching her face. Let me understand. She shook her head, backing away. I cannot. If I speak it out loud, if I let it be real again, I will break. I am barely holding together as it is. You are already broken, Preston said gently. And that is all right. Broken things can be mended. But you have to let someone in to help. Why? The word came out as a sob without tears. Why do you care? I am just your cook. I am nothing to you. You are not nothing. He moved closer slowly, as if approaching a skittish horse. You could never be nothing. From the moment you walked into this ranch, half frozen and empty-eyed, I saw someone worth saving. Someone worth knowing. I think you are remarkable, Lily Lancaster, and I am asking you to trust me. She wanted to run. She wanted to lock herself in her room and never come out. But she also wanted, desperately, to lay down the weight she had been carrying alone for so long. She looked into Preston's eyes, those steady gray-green eyes that held no judgment, only compassion and something that might have been affection, and she felt her defenses crumble. I had a husband, she whispered. Michael, and a daughter, Charlotte. She was 9 months old. Preston went very still. They died. October. Fever took them both within a week of each other. My mother-in-law died 2 weeks later. I buried them in Kansas and I tried to go on, but I could not. I could not stay in those places where they had been. So I sold everything we owned, bought a stagecoach ticket west and ran. I have been running ever since. The words came faster now, a dam breaking. I failed them. I could not save them. I sat by their beds and I prayed and I begged and I did everything I could think of, but they died anyway. My daughter died in my arms and there was nothing I could do. She was gasping now, her chest heaving, and Preston closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her, holding her as she shattered. No tears came, just dry, wrenching sobs that tore through her body, and he held her through all of it, one hand in her hair, the other pressed against her back, murmuring words she could not hear but felt in the tone of his voice. When the storm passed and she sagged against him, exhausted, he did not let go. You did not fail them, he said into her hair. Sickness is not something you can fight with will alone. You loved them and you cared for them and you were there with them. That is not failure. That is everything. I have nothing left, she whispered against his chest. Nothing but tears that will not come and this terrible winter that will not end. Preston pulled back enough to look down at her, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. His eyes were fierce and warm and full of something that made her heart stutter. You have me now, he said, his voice rough with emotion, and that is everything, always. She stared up at him, hardly daring to believe what she saw in his face. You do not even know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know you get up every morning even though you are drowning in grief. I know you take care of people even when you can barely take care of yourself. I know that I have been falling in love with you since the day you walked onto this ranch, and I do not care if it is too soon or too fast or too impossible. I love you, Lily. Let me help you carry this." She should have pulled away. She should have told him he was wrong, that she was not worth loving, that she would only bring him pain. But instead she rose on her toes and kissed him, tentative and searching, and when his arms tightened around her and he kissed her back, slow and deep and achingly gentle, she felt something inside her begin to thaw. They stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding each other, exchanging kisses that tasted of salt and promise. When they finally pulled apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "Stay with me tonight. Not in your room, in mine. I just want to hold you. I want you to know you are not alone anymore." Lily hesitated only a moment before nodding. She followed him upstairs to his room, larger than hers but just as plainly furnished, and they lay down together on his bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. Preston pulled quilts over them both and held her against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She closed her eyes and felt safe for the first time in months. The winter continued its cold grip on the land, but something had shifted between Lily and Preston. They did not hide their affection from the ranch hands, who accepted it with varying degrees of amusement and approval. Lily still cooked and managed the household, but now Preston was openly by her side whenever his work allowed, helping with tasks, talking with her about everything and nothing, making her laugh with stories of his early days trying to ranch, when he knew almost nothing about cattle or horses. She found herself opening up in return, telling him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her courtship with Michael, the joy and terror of becoming a mother. She spoke about Charlotte, her daughter's smile and her tiny hands and the way she had smelled like milk and sunshine. And though it hurt to remember, it also felt necessary, like lancing a wound so it could finally heal. Preston listened to everything, never flinching from her pain, and in return he shared his own losses. His parents, yes, but also a younger sister who had died of scarlet fever when he was 12, a first love who had married someone else, the loneliness of building a life in a place where he knew no one. They traded sorrows like currency and found that sharing them made the weight lighter. January arrived, and with it came a cold snap that froze water troughs solid and kept everyone working around the clock to keep the animals alive. Lily barely saw Preston for days, just long enough to shove hot food at him before he was back outside, breaking ice and hauling feed. She worried about him constantly, watching from windows as he worked in conditions that seemed impossible to survive. And when he finally stumbled inside on the fourth night, too exhausted to speak, she helped him out of his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, and held him by the fire until warmth returned to his body. "You are going to kill yourself working like this," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "It is what needs to be done." His words were slurred with fatigue. "The cattle cannot break the ice themselves. Then let the men do more. You do not have to carry everything alone." He looked at her with bleary eyes. "Yes, I do. It is my responsibility, my ranch." "And what good will your ranch be if you freeze to death trying to save it?" She gripped his face, forcing him to focus on her. "You told me I am not alone anymore. Well, neither are you. Let me help." "Let your men help. Stop trying to be invincible." Something in her words reached him, and he sagged against her, the fight going out of him. "I am so tired, Lily." "I know, my love, I know." She held him close, rocking him gently, and when he fell asleep in her arms, she maneuvered him into his bed and lay down beside him, keeping watch through the night. The cold snap broke, and life returned to a more manageable rhythm. Preston took her words to heart and began delegating more, trusting his men to handle tasks without his constant supervision. It gave him more time in the house, more time with Lily, and they fell into a domestic partnership that felt natural and right. They talked about the future in careful, tentative terms. Preston wanted to marry her, said so plainly one evening while they were sitting by the fire, but he also said he would wait as long as she needed. She had been married before, had loved and lost, and he would not rush her into something she was not ready for. Lily appreciated his patience, but she also knew that she did not want to wait. Life was too short and uncertain to waste time when happiness was within reach. On a cold February afternoon, with snow falling soft outside the windows, she found Preston in the barn checking on a pregnant mare. She stood in the doorway watching him work, his gentle hands on the horse's belly, his voice low and soothing, and she felt such a rush of love that it took her breath away. "Marry me," she said, and he turned so fast he nearly spooked the mare. "What? Marry me, Preston? I do not want to wait. I have been dead for months, and you brought me back to life. I want to build a future with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to help you run this ranch and raise horses and maybe, someday, have children again. I am scared of losing someone else I love, terrified honestly, but I am more scared of wasting the time we have. So marry me, please." Preston crossed the barn in long strides and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around, his laughter echoing off the rafters. "Yes, God, yes. I will marry you today if you want." She laughed too, giddy and breathless. Today might be a bit soon, but soon, very soon. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in San Bernardino with Mrs. Chen and Preston's ranch hands as witnesses. Lily wore a simple blue dress that Preston had bought for her in town, and Preston wore his best suit, which was still worn at the elbows but clean and pressed. The ceremony was brief, the words spoken by a circuit preacher who looked half frozen from his travels. But when Preston kissed her as his wife, Lily felt warmth spread through her entire body, chasing away the last of the winter cold. They held a celebration at the ranch that evening, the men whooping and congratulating them, Mrs. Chen presenting them with a beautiful embroidered tablecloth she had made, and everyone eating and drinking until late into the night. When they finally retreated to Preston's room, their room now, Lily felt nervous in a way she had not expected. She had been married before, had shared a bed with a man, but this felt different. This felt like a beginning, not a continuation. Preston was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, and when it was over and they lay tangled together, Lily felt something she had not felt in months: peace. She had nothing left but tears and winter when she arrived at this ranch, but Preston had given her everything. He had given her hope and love and a future. Spring came to San Bernardino in stages, the hard freeze gradually giving way to warmer days and cold nights, the hills slowly turning green with new grass. Lily threw herself into ranch life with renewed energy, not just cooking but helping with everything from garden planting to foaling season. Preston taught her to ride, laughing as she clung to the saddle horn with white knuckles, encouraging her until she gained confidence. They rode out together in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about their plans. The ranch was thriving under Preston's management, and he wanted to expand, buy more land, increase the herd. Lily supported him fully, managing the household finances with a careful eye, finding ways to save money without sacrificing quality. They were a good team, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses, and the men noticed. More than one told Lily that the boss was different since she arrived, happier, more at ease. In May, Lily realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another 2 weeks to be certain, then told Preston one morning over coffee. She watched his face carefully, afraid he might not be ready for children, but he set down his cup with shaking hands and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "Are you happy?" she asked, her own voice trembling. "I am terrified and thrilled and so happy I can barely think straight." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "Are you? I know this must bring up painful memories." It did. The thought of being pregnant again, of carrying a child and risking the pain of loss, made her stomach churn with fear, but it also filled her with hope. "I am scared," she admitted, "but I want this. I want to have a family with you." Preston placed his hand over her still flat belly, his expression reverent. "We will face it together. Whatever happens, we will face it together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Lily's body changed, swelling with life, and she marveled at the difference between this pregnancy and her last. With Charlotte, she had been alone much of the time while Michael traveled to preach, managing in rented rooms with no support. Now she had Preston, who was attentive to the point of being overprotective, and an entire ranch of men who treated her like precious cargo. They would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and one of the younger hands even whittled her a rocking chair for the baby. As her belly grew, Lily found herself talking to the child, telling stories about Charlotte, about Michael, about all the love that had come before. She wanted this baby to know that it was not a replacement, but an addition to a family that included people no longer living. Preston would sit with her in the evenings, his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick, and they would discuss names and futures and all the possibilities that lay ahead. In September, Mrs. Chen came to stay at the ranch for a few weeks, wanting to be there when the baby arrived. Her presence was a comfort to Lily, who had grown to love the older woman like a mother. They worked together in the kitchen, Mrs. Chen teaching her Chinese recipes and telling stories of her own life, and Lily felt surrounded by love in a way she had not experienced since childhood. The baby came in early October, almost exactly a year after Charlotte's death, and the labor was long and difficult. Lily labored through the night while Preston paced outside the room, Mrs. Chen and a midwife from town attending to her. When the pain became unbearable, when she was certain she could not endure another moment, she thought of Preston waiting for her, thought of the life they had built, and found strength she did not know she possessed. The baby was born as the sun rose, a healthy boy with strong lungs and Preston's dark hair. The midwife placed him in Lily's arms, and she looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face and felt her heart expand impossibly. Preston was allowed in moments later, and when he saw his son for the first time, he wept openly, tears streaming down his face as he touched the baby's tiny hand. "He is perfect," Preston whispered, leaning over to kiss Lily's forehead. "You are perfect, thank you." They named him Thomas Michael Everett, honoring both Preston's father and Lily's first husband. Preston held his son with a tenderness that made Lily fall in love with him all over again, and when the baby latched on to nurse, she felt a circle closing. She had lost so much, but she had also been given so much. Charlotte would always be part of her heart, a daughter who lived in memory and love, but Thomas was her present and future, a child born from hope and healing. The ranch hands came by one at a time to meet the new arrival, bringing small gifts and clumsy congratulations. Mrs. Chen stayed another month to help, and then returned to San Bernardino with promises to visit often. The house filled with the sounds of a baby crying and cooing, and Lily learned to manage motherhood alongside her duties as Preston's wife and partner in running the ranch. Preston was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings, carrying Thomas in a sling while he worked so Lily could rest, singing lullabies in a surprisingly good voice. Watching him with their son, Lily sometimes felt overwhelmed by gratitude. This man had saved her life in every way that mattered. He had given her a reason to keep breathing, a home, a family, a love that sustained her through the darkest times. Thomas grew rapidly, hitting milestones that Lily tracked with careful attention. His first smile at 6 weeks. His first laugh at 3 months. The way he reached for Preston when he entered a room, the way he snuggled into Lily's neck when he was tired. She took nothing for granted, knowing how quickly life could be stolen away, but she also worked to be present in the joy rather than dwelling in fear. Winter came again, but this time Lily faced it without terror. She had survived one winter here and emerged into spring, and she would survive this one too. The ranch was snug and warm, the pantry well stocked, and her family was healthy and safe. On Christmas Eve, she and Preston sat by the fire with Thomas sleeping in his cradle nearby, and she remembered the Christmas before, how broken she had been, how certain that she would never feel happiness again. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I am thinking about how much has changed in a year, how I thought my life was over and you showed me it was just beginning again." Preston kissed the top of her head. "You did that yourself. I just gave you a place to land while you healed." "You gave me everything," Lily corrected. She turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole world. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I know the feeling." He smiled and kissed her properly. "But we do not have to be scared. We have each other and we have our son and we have a good life here." That is more than most people ever get. He was right. It was more than she had ever expected to have after losing Michael and Charlotte. She had arrived in San Bernardino with nothing left but tears and winter, empty and broken and ready to give up. Preston had looked at her with those steady eyes and said she was worth saving, and then he had proven it every day since. He had loved her back to life, given her a home and a family and a future, and she would spend the rest of her days being grateful for the gift of him. The years that followed were full of work and growth. The ranch expanded as Preston had dreamed, acquiring more land and building a reputation for quality horses. Lily managed the household and finances, raised their son, and became a skilled horsewoman in her own right. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved following his father around and asking endless questions. When he was 3, Lily gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Charlotte Everett, a baby girl with auburn hair like her mother and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. Preston was overjoyed to have a daughter, treating Grace like precious china while still encouraging her to be strong and capable. Lily watched him teach both children to ride, to care for animals, to work hard and treat people with respect, and she saw the values she had loved in him being passed to the next generation. They were building something that would last, a legacy of love and integrity. The ranch hands who had been there when Lily first arrived spoke fondly of the transformation they had witnessed, how the boss had been a good man but lonely before, and how Lily had brought light and warmth to the place. New hands who joined heard stories about the cook, who became the boss's wife, about her kindness and strength, about the way she had arrived with nothing and built a family. Lily did not think of herself as remarkable, but Preston told her often that she was, that her resilience and capacity for love inspired him daily. Mrs. Chen remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting regularly and being treated as family. She watched Thomas and Grace with the tenderness of a grandmother, and Lily made sure her children knew the debt they owed this woman who had helped their mother when she needed it most. It was Mrs. Chen who taught Grace to embroider, who told Thomas stories of China and railroad building, who sat with Lily on the porch during summer evenings and talked about life and loss and the surprising ways healing happens. When Thomas was 7 and Grace was 4, Lily gave birth to another son, Samuel Preston Everett, a baby who came into the world hollering and never quite stopped. He was loud and fearless and kept them all on their toes, and Preston joked that they finally had a child who matched the wildness of ranch life. Lily loved watching her 3 children together. The way Thomas looked after his younger siblings, the way Grace mothered both her brothers, the way Samuel adored his older siblings and tried to keep up with everything they did. The house that had been so empty and plain when Lily first arrived was now filled with life and noise and laughter. There were toys scattered in corners, children's drawings pinned to walls, muddy footprints that had to be cleaned up daily. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. Lily had never imagined she could be this happy, that joy could be reclaimed after such profound loss. She still thought of Charlotte, especially on the anniversary of her death, and she made sure her children knew about the sister who had come before. She told them stories about Charlotte's short life, showed them the watch that had belonged to Michael, explained that love does not end when someone dies, it just changes shape. Thomas and Grace listened solemnly and asked thoughtful questions, and Lily was proud of their compassion and understanding. Preston supported her in keeping Charlotte's memory alive while also helping her stay grounded in the present. He had a gift for knowing when she needed to talk about the past and when she needed to be distracted by the present. After particularly hard days, when grief ambushed her unexpectedly, he would hold her and let her cry the tears that came more easily now. And then he would remind her of all the reasons she had to keep going. Their children, their life, their love that had been forged in the hardest of circumstances and proven unbreakable. As the children grew older, Lily began teaching them alongside their ranch education. She read to them every evening, teaching them letters and numbers, history and geography. Preston helped with the practical education, teaching them about weather and animal husbandry and the business of running a ranch. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with horses that rivaled his father's, while Grace surprised everyone by developing a keen head for numbers and finance. Samuel was still young enough that his talents were unclear, but he showed early signs of his mother's compassion and his father's determination. The ranch continued to prosper, and Preston and Lily became respected members of the San Bernardino community. They attended church socials and town meetings, helped neighbors during hard times, and opened their home to anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. Lily remembered what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure no one who came to their door was turned away empty-handed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Lily into town for a rare dinner at the nicest restaurant San Bernardino had to offer. They dressed in their best clothes, left the children with Mrs. Chen, and enjoyed a meal without interruptions or spilled milk. Over dessert, Preston pulled out a small box and slid it across the table. "What is this?" Lily asked, confused. They had never been people who marked occasions with gifts, too practical for such things. "Open it." Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Lily opened it and found 2 tiny photographs, one of Charlotte and one of Michael, images she had described to Preston many times but never thought to see again. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "How did you?" "I wrote to Kansas, to the church where Michael preached. I described you and the timing, and the preacher there remembered you. He found a woman who had known you, who had photographs. It took 2 years to arrange, but I wanted you to have this. I wanted you to be able to carry them with you always." Lily could not speak through the tears that flowed freely now, tears that had finally returned to her after those long months of empty crying. She stood and moved around the table to kiss her husband, not caring that they were in a public place, not caring about anything except this man who understood her so completely. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you more than I can ever say." "I love you too," Preston replied, fastening the locket around her neck. "Every day for the rest of my life I will love you." They returned to the ranch that night to find their children asleep and Mrs. Chen dozing in the rocking chair by the fire. Preston carried Thomas to bed while Lily tucked in Grace and Samuel, kissing each forehead and whispering blessings over them. Then they retreated to their own room, the room where they had held each other through countless nights, where they had made love and made promises and made plans for the future. They undressed slowly, taking their time, and came together with the easy familiarity of a decade of marriage mixed with passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Preston's arms around her and the locket resting against her heart, Lily thought about the journey that had brought her here. The stagecoach driver finding her in the mountain pass, Mrs. Chen taking her in, Preston offering her a job and then offering her everything else. She had had nothing left but tears and winter, grief so overwhelming she could not imagine surviving it. And then Preston had said she was not alone, that she had him now, and that was everything. Always. He had meant those words, had proven them through actions and commitment and unwavering love. He had given her back her life, and in return she had given him her heart, fully and without reservation. More years passed, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew into capable young people who loved the ranch and the life their parents had built. Thomas eventually took over much of the daily management, freeing Preston to focus on breeding and training horses. Grace surprised no one by turning out to be a sharp businesswoman who expanded their markets beyond California. Samuel became the heart of the ranch in many ways, the one who checked on the hands and made sure everyone felt valued, the one who never forgot a birthday or a kind word. Lily and Preston grew older together, their hair silvering and their faces lining with years of sun and hard work and laughter. They were still partners in every sense, still best friends and lovers, still the people who understood each other better than anyone else in the world. They had built something remarkable, not just in terms of land and cattle and success, but in terms of family and legacy and love that would continue long after they were gone. On a warm evening in late spring, when Lily was 52 and Preston was 54, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their entire story. Their children were grown, Thomas married with a child of his own, Grace courting a good man from town, Samuel still at home but talking about starting his own horse training business. The ranch was thriving, the house was full, and life was good. Preston reached over and took Lily's hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had done thousands of times before. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Lily thought about everything that had led her to this moment, the losses that had nearly destroyed her, the winter that had stripped her down to nothing, the decision to keep walking when she wanted to lie down and die, the ranch appearing like a mirage in the desert, and the cowboy who saw her when she was invisible to herself. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Every sorrow, every struggle, every moment of pain led me here to you, to this life. I would not change any of it because changing it would mean losing what we have." Preston lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You saved my life as much as I saved yours, you know. I was building a ranch but not a life. You taught me the difference." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the first stars appearing overhead. Inside the house, they could hear Samuel moving around, starting dinner, the domestic sounds of home. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the ordinary business of living. But tonight, They had this moment of peace and gratitude and deep, abiding love. Lily thought back to that terrible winter day in 1881, when the stagecoach driver found her in the mountain pass, more dead than alive, with nothing left but tears that would not come. She remembered the crushing weight of grief, the emptiness that made every breath painful, the certainty that she would never be whole again. She remembered arriving at this ranch broken and hollow, unable to imagine a future that held anything but more loss. And then Preston had looked at her with those steady gray-green eyes and said she was worth saving. He had given her work and shelter and gradually, tentatively, his heart. He had listened to her story without judgment, held her through the worst of her grief, and loved her back to life with patience and persistence. He had promised she was not alone anymore, that she had him now, and that was everything. He had kept that promise every single day for more than 30 years. Through births and deaths, through hard winters and drought summers, through prosperity and setback, he had been beside her, steady and true. He had shown her that healing was possible, that love could be found again, that joy could coexist with sorrow, that life was worth living even after unimaginable loss. Lily leaned her head on Preston's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, warm and solid and safe. She had nothing left but tears and winter when she found this place, but Preston had given her everything. A home, a family, a purpose, a love that sustained her through every trial. He had been right all those years ago in the kitchen on Christmas night. Having him was everything, always. The stars grew brighter overhead as full darkness fell, and Lily closed her eyes, content. Her story could have ended in that mountain pass, frozen and alone and forgotten. Instead, it had led her here to this porch, to this man, to this beautiful, hard-won life. She had survived grief that should have destroyed her, and in surviving she had discovered that the human heart was capable of infinite capacity for love. She had learned that loss did not diminish love, it transformed it. Charlotte would always be her daughter. Michael would always have been her first love, and the grief of losing them would always be part of her story. But that grief had softened over the years into something she could carry without being crushed, a bittersweet ache that reminded her to cherish what she had while she had it, and what she had was extraordinary. A husband who loved her fiercely and gently, who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Children and grandchildren who filled her days with purpose and her heart with pride. A home built on hard work and honesty, on respect and partnership, on the foundation of two broken people choosing to heal together. Preston stirred beside her and suggested they head inside before the chill settled in. Lily stood, her joints creaking in ways they had not when she was 24, and took his offered hand. They walked into the house together, closing the door on the night, and Lily felt complete in a way she had never expected to feel again. The cowboy had been right. She had him, and that was everything. Always.